In this section, we're going to be exploring some of the anatomy of anxiety. So what's going on at a physiologic level in the body while you might be experiencing anxiety, and how we can use these very same sensations that are the trigger mechanisms of anxious thinking and turn them around to the very mechanisms of deep intelligence held within our body. And this comes down to an understanding of the nervous system and a little bit of how it works. So you won't be tested on the hard anatomy and physiology of your nervous system or any parts of the body. This is going to be more for you as an opportunity to explore where your sensations are coming from, how they're generated in your body, and different ways that you can interpret these sensations to your benefit. So that anxiety isn't just such a misunderstanding of this nebulous field of feelings and emotions. You're going to get a better background understanding of how the autonomic nervous system, that fight or flight or rest digest system, comes into play. And so maybe you've heard of our autonomic nervous system. It's the background operating nervous system that it runs all of the systems of our body and also informs our awareness of the status of our body. So our background nervous system is split into two branches. One is the parasympathetic, or the rest digest branch. And this is the part of our nervous system that turns on when we're in a more relaxed state of being. When we're feeling more grounded, when we might be with family or people that we feel comfortable with, this rest digest mechanism comes into play. And a whole cascade of events happens during this, that our body switches completely gears to another function where we focus more on digesting food, rebuilding muscle and bone and tissue. It's a more metabolic cycle of our body. And then you have the sympathetic nervous system. And again, it's not just a different way of processing, it's a whole different branch of the nervous system. And we'll show you a slide later that will articulate this. But the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight mechanism. And during that state of our nervous system, there is a lot of energy and blood flow that goes to the periphery of our body. So our muscles become more tense, ready for action, ready to either evade any threat or potential danger in our environment, or pursue any opportunities we might discover in our environment. So I don't want to label the sympathetic nervous system as necessarily bad. It's just a nervous system that is costly. So we do more catabolic activity. So we're breaking down muscle, bone, and tissue to accomplish that objective, either evasion or acquisition. So either one of those, and that's the sympathetic nervous system. And it's not so much that either one is good or bad. Again, these are different states of the nervous system, and they tend to ebb and flow throughout a day. So it's a spectrum that we want to have a good balance between. If we're too parasympathetic, that is like the ultimate chill person. When we're too parasympathetic, it's hard to get our excitement, the rhythms of excitement and our inertia up for activity. And likewise, if it's too sympathetic, meaning that we're always in fight or flight, this is a lot going on with anxiety, is that fight or flight mechanism is just in a heightened state that's perpetually running. And when that system is turned on for too long, it leads to things like adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, burnout. There's all different labels of being in that heightened state of activity for too long. So learning how to undulate between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system is a deep skill that we can learn within our own body. And we're going to explore a lot of that through this topic here. This is just a diagram for you to explore, to look at, so that you can see the different systems and how they're impacted from the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic branch and what it does. And you can see that on the right side of the column, or the right side facing you, the left side as you're looking at it. That parasympathetic branch and all of the systems that it impacts while that system is in play. And then the other side, the purple-pink side, sympathetic, and all the systems that are impacted by that system being activated. And you might notice as you explore this slide, when you're looking at the sympathetic system, what's going on with the heart rate, what's going on with the lungs, what's going on with the stomach, and how those are often signature impacts from prolonged anxiety. When there's lots of anxiety held in the body for long periods of time, these systems get kind of overworked and used. And so you might be able to identify, either on the parasympathetic end or the sympathetic end, some of these physiologic impacts that you might experience in your own experience. So take note of that, because as you gain the skill to balance some of these systems out and be comfortable flowing between the parasympathetic and sympathetic state, you might see some of these other associated symptoms subside. So you might be able to digest your food better, and the otherwise, and sleep and things like that tend to fall more into place when we're in a good rhythm in that autonomic nervous system. This slide is an image of the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve they're learning so much more about it. There's research every day coming out about how important the vagus nerve is, how it's been overlooked from an anatomical perspective and a physiologic perspective from its importance. It has 10 times the innervation going upstream than it does going downstream. So all of the information coming into our central nervous system, into our brain, it actually goes a direct route to our brain. It doesn't even go to the spinal cord. The vagus nerve wraps around through all of our internal organs, our stomach, our liver, gallbladder, all the way around the esophagus, around the heart. All of the vagus nerve comes into basically like a neural superhighway that runs up through and through the neck into the base of the brain. And that vagus nerve is constantly sending signals into the body. A tone you'll hear me say is vagal tone. And vagal tone is a term used to describe the time it takes for the vagus nerve to go from an excited state to a more relaxed state. And when a stimulus or a stressful event happens in our environment, the vagus nerve kicks in, and that's a lot of the function of the autonomic nervous system, that sympathetic nervous system. The vagus nerve takes over, heart rate's racing, everything I said starts to happen. And as that's happening, it's sending signals to the brain to move into action. And so that stimulating event kicks off the cascade of the sympathetic response. Well, once you might determine that the threat is no longer in the environment, and I'll describe more how animals go through this process naturally and how we can do it more naturally too, and actually improve our vagal tone. But when we have a stimulating event and the nervous system never calms down and it stays at that heightened state, well, that inability to down-regulate is called low vagal tone. And if you can regulate really quickly, let's say a stressful event happens, you realize that there's no threat, and you're able to take a few breaths and drop that vagus nerve stimulation back down and recover. Well, that is called high vagal tone. So people that are able to handle more stressful situations have a higher vagal tone. People that tend to get stimulated and stay stimulated for a long time, they are said to have low vagal tone. And the good news is vagal tone is something we can train. It's something that you can actually build a tolerance to over time, and we're going to give you some really cool exercises to do that. But for now, know that there is this vagus nerve, and vagus means wandering, and it wanders through all of the organs of the body, sending the signals into your brain. It's part of our enteric nervous system, or that intrinsic nervous system, that sense of awareness of what's going on in your body. This also has a lot of deep relationships to the diaphragm, and how the diaphragm is a muscle that goes across the body. Again, this isn't stuff you need to know as far as a test. It's just a little to understand that our nervous systems are always on. There's so many things going on in our body that as you gain some distinctions around, it'll give you more leverage to understand your own sensations. So again, we're not doing an anatomy test, but I just want to describe what's going on in the body. So now we have this diaphragm, and the diaphragm is a very interesting muscle. It goes horizontally and transverse through the whole body, across the entire body. It separates. In this picture, you'll see the lungs and the heart. Under the lungs and the heart is the liver and the stomach. It separates that. It goes right through there as a sheet in the diaphragm. Well, that diaphragm is an extremely sensitive muscle. It has so many functions. Of course, you understand and maybe have heard diaphragmatic breathing. So it's a primary breathing muscle. But it also has deep attachments to the spine itself and the rib cage. It is a primary stabilizing muscle of the rib cage, low back, and pelvis. That diaphragm is a key muscle of the core, but it's also dynamic. It's always breathing. It's really interesting too, because you have both peripheral control, so you can control the diaphragm by choosing to breathe either slowly or more rapidly. So we have some muscular control, peripheral control of the diaphragm, but it's also automatic, meaning that it's part of our autonomic function. So breathing happens whether or not we are conscious of it. So there's automatic control of the diaphragm. So it's a very interesting and dynamic muscle that serves lots of functions. It is a key muscle in anxiety. When the diaphragm is held in contraction, you'll notice short, shallow breaths. If there's too much tension held in the diaphragm, oftentimes it's reported with anxiety, that sensation of tension in the solar plexus, or tension in the throat, or a loss of ability to talk or think. Well, if you can imagine the diaphragm in chronic contraction and the spasming of the vagus nerve that goes through the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is squeezing the vagus nerve, and the more that feeling is held in contraction, it sends more and more signals of distress to our central nervous system, to our awareness, and then comes all the anxious thinking. So with the diaphragm and the vagus nerve so closely related, if you take a moment in that anxiety moment to actually let the diaphragm expand on inhale. So it inhales, and then exhales. And when you go through cycles and long breaths, we actually bring that vagus nerve and diaphragm into a more parasympathetic state almost immediately. But you as the individual has to give permission to break the cycle of the anxious loop. And this illustrates that close relationship, what's going on in the body, and then how those thoughts are really produced from those sensations. So giving yourself an opportunity to drop out of the thoughts and check in with what is going on with my diaphragm. How am I actually allowing myself to come back to a more parasympathetic state? So this is why understanding a little bit about the vagus nerve and a little bit about the diaphragm goes a long way in helping you determine your state of being and how to move into a more optimal or preferred state of being through the practices and mechanisms you choose. I just want to highlight in this slide the limbic system, and it's a very complex system, but in short, it has to do with our emotions. Our limbic system is a very sensitive and old part of our brain that is, again, always in operation. It's going constantly. It has to do with threat assessment in our environment. The amygdala, which is part of this limbic system, determines the volume of threat, and the ability to make accurate threat assessments and really understand if something's a real threat or just an imaginary threat has a lot to do with our anxious response to that. So understanding again that there is this system, and the limbic emotional system is so sensitive. It's set often from our caregivers, so people that around us, if we grew up in a more anxious environment, our nervous system might be set to a more anxious state as a baseline normal, and that's something to recalibrate as you gain an understanding here. Also, the limbic system regulates to all the other limbic systems in its environment. So this is a big aspect of community. So when the community or the group is in really good vibe together, if they're all vibing in a good way together, their limbic systems are all resonating in a harmonious way. If there's a breakdown or disharmony in the system, if there's agitation or anger within members of the group, the whole group might be able to feel that, and that's all limbic response. And so it's really useful to understand how to ground your sensations in your own feelings, and I'm going to give you lots of little different exercises to start creating distinctions within what's going on with your feelings versus what's going on with the community or group's feelings, because our limbic systems actually are attuned to both. So I just want to highlight a little bit about this system here, and of course I invite you to deep dive into more understandings. I find this stuff fascinating. It's amazing what's going on behind the scenes, but for us, for here, all I wanted to illustrate is to highlight a little bit that there are deeper drivers to some of the feelings of anxiety, and the more that you can create distinctions in your environment, maybe you had a perceived threat, maybe stage fright might be something, or social anxiety might be something. Well, the level your limbic system might be responding to a social event might be comparable to how it would respond to a lion being right next to you, and maybe even worse. But the imagination of how bad it would be is actually what's bad. And if you give yourself the opportunity to test your theory and see if that's really a threat and start practicing, that's how you can start to build some tolerance and actually start to regulate your nervous system in more and more dynamic environments. And that's just a skill that can get developed by you over time. And our nervous system comes down to this. It's ultimately about awareness. Of course, it has all the internal functions as part of its process. So how it's kind of passing information internally in our body, that's part of our nervous system function. But it's also has to do with what's going on outside of our body. So how are we in relationship to the things around us? So all the different types of awarenesses that are possible. So our information, our nervous system being like the ultimate receiver or antenna, and all of these different awarenesses that are possible, that are going on, that if we're not aware of, if we didn't actually create distinction in this field of awareness, it could just be agitation or static, another driver of anxiety. So here I want to expand into different types of awarenesses and how you can use your focus and use your attention to scan these different fields of awareness for yourself. and become more masterful in understanding about where you are and what you're paying attention to. So, quick overview, and then we're going to go into each one. But there are 6 types of awareness. There's exteroception, and that's your awareness of the world around you, how you're perceiving the environment around you. There's interoception, which is the vagus nerve, the diaphragm, all of the ways that you feel internally in your body. And that relationship between the exteroception and the interoception, they congruent, and that's how we start to gain skill in that relationship between the inner and outer world. We have proprioception, and proprioception is our body's ability to sense where it is in space, how we're holding our posture, our disposition, how we're moving, our balance, so on and so forth. We have nociception. Nociception is our sense of pain, pressure, hot and cold, the sensations on our skin, all of the nociceptors around our body that are picking up information from the outside world. And then we have our cognition. That's our way of synthesizing all of this information into our awareness of knowing, and intuition, which is that deeper sense, which brings in our felt sense in our body, our interoception, our deeper gut instincts come with this intuition awareness. So interoception, this is just an overview of all the different organs and how they might be influencing your awareness of what's going on within your body. And so sometimes thirst can show up as anxiety. Hunger can show up as anxiety. When you can create a distinction between thirst, hunger, and fear, well, now you can start to parse them out so that hunger doesn't turn into, hangry? When people are really outwardly angry at other people because they're hungry. And if you know what hunger feels like and how to satiate your body earlier, that changes your mood. And that's all based on interoception and your practices of getting a deeper sense of how you're feeling at any given moment in your body. Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I fatigued? Am I tired? Sometimes it's great to work out and exercise, but if I really check in with myself and I'm not feeling that a really hard workout would be best, well, maybe a light walk or just a breathing exercise would be good today. And so that's going to come from a felt sense of what's going on in the body. This is just a slide about proprioception. So this is showing how it's used. Of course, we can be doing yoga, we could be doing sports, we could be doing dancing, but even just walking up and down stairs or anywhere, anytime we're walking in a gait pattern, this ability to sense where our body is in space gives us a sense of security in how we move. And we can develop a deeper sense of proprioception through a good movement practice. This is a description. This is an overview of the nociception, so you can get a sense of that stimulus or a painful response and how it's sent directly to the muscles, and how the muscles, and this illustrates, I would like to illustrate here, that our body operates on its own intelligence. This is part of that autonomic nervous system or reflex. Some nociception, like imagine grabbing a hot pan and how the body automatically knows to let go. Well, so much has to happen for that to occur. When that signal of heat reaches the spinal cord, and if it's at a threshold, it doesn't even go to the brain. It's so intelligent that by the time it gets to the spinal cord and it says this is an overwhelming sensation, it lets go before the brain is even aware of it. And that is an amazing thing our body does. And we can use that to also train our skills to be sharper and sharper in its response. So nociception does have to do with pain, but it also has to do with degrees of sensitivity. So that ability to feel a little grain of sand in your fingertips at the same time as climbing up or rock climbing on a hard surface. So we can have that same pain pain or pressure, but the vast range of how it's perceived, because our nociception can get more and more fine-tuned through practice and awareness. So the aspect of our body that I talked about being the antenna, all of the awareness, that's one part of the nervous system, is our ability to sense and feel the environment. The other part of our nervous system is to respond to the stresses and pressures of the environment. So it's good to sense and feel it, but then we have to respond. And we have these 6 different stressors that are creating pressures in different ways in our body all of the time. And I just want to list these out because you might be able to identify imbalances or opportunities for yourself to either add or subtract some of these stressors. Because when we're thinking about anxiety again in our nervous system, when there's lots of different pressures coming into the nervous system at once, that pressure can be so overbearing that the nervous system breaks down into disease states, sickness, illness, all of the other negative impacts that too much stress has in our system. But I'll also add that stress in our current terminology often gets a bad rap because stress is an essential part of how we stay healthy. In fact, all of these 6 stressors listed here, when they're done in perfect balance, when all the stress matches just right within our body, that's called homeostasis. That balance, that delicate balance of all the stressors is how we actually stay healthy. So adding the right medicinal loads of stress is a key part of staying healthy. So when we say I'm stressed out, typically what that means is there's too much stress of one kind in one area. And I just want to be clear with that because I don't want to make stress the enemy. I want to make stress an understood part of your life, and then how you balance your stressors to be part of the skills you develop from this class and how you put all of this into practice going forward. So the 6 stressors are chemical, and that's any type of kind of medication, drugs, alcohol, caffeine, even food, but that's also nutritional. But chemical products that might be on or around you, cleaning-wise and house-wise, again, healthy, unhealthy. So chemical stressors are different chemicals that could be impacting our body in pluses or minuses or pushing away or towards. So chemical stress, thermal, hot and cold, electromagnetic stress, of course, all of the electronic gadgets around us, but also the sun. And the earth itself puts off a lot of infrared, thermal stress as well as electromagnetic stress. So stress not being good or bad, just again a category. Physical stress, this has to do with exercise as well as too much exercise. So how you balance physical stress in your body. Nutritional stress, and then mental emotional stress. And that's the, I guess the popular bucket that people use when people are feeling lots of mental emotional pressure. They often say, I'm feeling really stressed out. And while that's true, sometimes the antidote to that mental emotional stress is adding just a little bit of physical stress through a good workout. Maybe adding a little bit of thermal stress through a sauna or a cold plunge. Maybe adding a little bit of nutritional stress by eating really good food. So we can think of stress in pluses and minuses and pushes and pulls. And so where you might feel really stressed in one area, you can use that as an opportunity to balance in another area. So this is a chart that just shows that all the stresses impact the autonomic nervous system in a collective way. So if you have lots of good stressors in the bucket, the autonomic nervous system will balance itself into a nice homeostatic state. If there's lots of imbalances in the stressors, it'll trigger a more sympathetic state of being so that there'll be more fight or flight in the nervous system in general. So becoming aware of your stress bucket and then the different mechanisms you have to alleviate stress by balancing it with other stressors. What you're eating, what you're not eating, how you're exercising, moving, and otherwise. And all of those happen to be excellent in vagal tone training. So knowing your threshold so that that time when the vagus nerve is kicking up into that break threshold where it becomes overwhelming, learning how to down regulate through building a tolerance to stress through low grade exposure, through exercise and physical practices that put stress in a medicinal way on your body so that you can adapt towards strength, and a higher degree of sensitivity so that you know how to respond. This is a quick, there's a couple examples here of vagal tone training that you can use on the fly. And they're useful any time of day. Honestly, you can do these in periodic or episodic practices. Of course, when you're in a heightened state of anxiety, it's the best if you can catch yourself in that state of anxiety to actually do a full box breath, which would be a 4-second inhalation, a 4-second hold at the top, an 8-second exhalation, and another 4-second hold at the bottom. And if you can do that for 5 times, 10 times, take note of the state your mind is in after you do that. And if you can do that in a heightened state of anxiety, I can almost guarantee you would probably notice a shift immediately after towards more a relaxed state in your mind. And that's a really powerful exercise. It's not easy to do, catching it on the fly. So every time you do it, give yourself a high five. It's great to catch yourself in the process. Nasal breathing, mouth closed, it slows your breathing down. So imagine taking full 10-second inhales, 10-second exhales with your mouth closed. And that is another powerful way to downregulate the vagus nerve. Cold showers, this is a all-time favorite, but it's also quite unpopular because a lot of people don't like the cold. But there is a paradox in the cold, and if you can just test yourself and get over it or get into it as it is a stimulating event at first. But learning how to breathe while being stimulated, it actually triggers a very deep vagal response where you can relax the nervous system very quickly, even though it's that sensational experience of cold. So that dichotomy of being able to breathe while that sensation is going on is a powerful vagal strengthening exercise, and it helps you develop vagal tone in multiple scenarios where you can actually just breathe under more and more pressure. And that's how you know you're getting stronger in some ways. How all of your practices of emotional resilience, of emotional agility, how all of these practices are coming into fruition, you'll be able to tell through exercises like this. And then exercises like this will also impact all of those domains. I really wouldn't be doing it service if I didn't discuss a little bit about the RAS as it pertains to the anatomy of our nervous system, how our perception works, and how important this part of our brain is. It's called the reticular activating system. It's the RAS. And it is a bundle of nerves or a group of nerves that all of the incoming information of our body goes through. So everything that we're feeling, sensing, all of our memory, all of our imagination, everything that our body is sensing and feeling goes through the RAS. And the RAS shuttles that information to various parts of our brain. And while billions of bits are coming through per second, most of that being shuttled to the unconscious and autonomic nervous system, so the things that are operating in the background, a very small percentage of that RAS is shuttled to your conscious perception, what you actually perceive in the world. Now, if there's pain in your body, that will actually take up a certain amount of bandwidth within that perception so that you can be aware of different pains in the body. But that also means it's taking up bandwidth of awareness. So if there's too much pain, it's hard to focus and concentrate in other areas. So it becomes a priority for our attention and our awareness to take care of that pain. So the RAS can be hijacked by things that take priority within our body. Aside from the physical things that take priority in our body, hunger, thirst, I have to go to the bathroom, all of those will break through the RAS and send those signals to our awareness. If none of those are going on, let's say all of the bathroom needs are met, the food's met, you're in your rest digest state, but you're satisfied, well, then the RAS gets to work on other things. And if you've ever had the experience of shopping for a car or a particular brand of computers or anything, if you see that, if you find yourself thinking about those things more often, you might notice them in your perception more. So you'll see that car everywhere you drive. If you learn a new word, you'll hear that word over and over again, just randomly in public space. And that's the RAS at work. So it acts almost like our internal Google search string from past experiences. So our brain loves confirmation bias. So our RAS is programmed by everything that has happened to us, the movies we watch, the books we read, the music we listen to, the professions we're in, all of that program the RAS to scan the field, to scan everything outside of our body, to look for those opportunities that match the RAS. Now you could imagine this system with lots of anxiety and fear put into the RAS can be like a runaway train where the RAS is constantly reiterating the fear that we might be feeling or the threat that's around us. And it's constantly picking that out of the environment or at least hyper-vigilant to it. And this is the RAS at work. That's when the RAS might be working against us. So understanding that you even have an RAS and that it is something that can be programmed through your practices, this gives you an enormous amount of leverage to start swaying your brand of attention towards more self-directed ideas of what you would like to see happen. Let's say instead of filling your mind with worry, doubt, and fear, if you're filling your mind with what you're practicing, what you're hopeful about, and what you're excited about learning, then you'll start to see more of that in your field. And so this RAS is constantly scanning to reaffirm your beliefs and your desired outcomes, whether that be negative or positive. So if we're worrying and in doubt and in fear, our RAS will serve to reinforce that story. And if we're watching movies and reading books that reinforce that story, you can see that loop start to shape our body and shape how our nervous system relates to the outside world. And likewise, if you use that same idea with the RAS and start studying things you want to learn about, start focusing on the passions that drive your curiosity, then the RAS goes to work and starts looking for those opportunities to reinforce that desire in you. So this is a really powerful opportunity for you to be selective, to be discerning, to respect what the RAS is, and then use it to your advantage. And I really want to stress that because this is a pivotal part of how we can start to shape our own nervous system to be in more harmony with the outside world. So in reflection, what feels useful to you from this section? Because it's not important to know all the anatomy, to understand exactly what systems are upregulated or downregulated. What's important for you? What did you take out of this section to understand the background operations of your body a little bit more? What sparked maybe a little bit of curiosity for you to explore in your own learning? You don't have to deep dive into all of the anatomy and physiology, but what sounded interesting to you to explore a little further? I'd like you to take this opportunity to actually parse out what stressors you're interacting with on a regular basis. Identify all of the negative and positive stressors that you're intentionally adding and subtracting to your life. And going forward, which would be really useful to add or subtract more of. And this is how we start to get good with the pressures. Once you start to understand pressure and stress, we can use it skillfully to add and subtract pressure and stress to help our nervous system find that nice harmony, that nice ebb and flow of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. And then the lastly is, how can you imagine distributing that stress skillfully so that you're not looking at necessarily just work-life balance or compartmentalizing, but looking at your whole life as a flow and where you can add and subtract different stressors, different support mechanisms for your nervous system to operate at its best. And so that you can build a good relationship with your sensations, all of that background operating chatter that could be useful information.